Hey guys, so welcome to the Back to Square One podcast. And today, Kedrick and myself will be talking to Chris Tan. Now, for those who don't know who this guy is, he has previously held multiple powerlifting records in New Zealand, but has since moved on to more real sports, bodybuilding.
Yeah.
And I must say, Kedrick, for someone who is on a plant-based diet like Chris, he is really making me personally consider making the switch over because look at how his biceps just fills up that shit. I don't know about you, Kedrick, but I don't really have that kind of capacity.
Yeah, I definitely needed a fake background, so like it covers up like my body, so that it makes me look a little bit bigger. Because if you look at the videos, for those of you who are listening on audio, man, look at the videos just for the biceps, just for the biceps. Look at it. So yeah.
That's cool, man. Well, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
That's cool, man. So, being plant-based, tell us a little bit more. So, I know for a fact, and we've obviously met through uni and stuff like that. You
Yeah.
previously weren't a plant-based eater. And I
Yeah.
guess I kind of want to bring it back to the start. Like, what were some of the, I guess, philosophies or what has happened to you over that time where you actually decided to make that switch? Was it for health? Was it for personal reasons?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, just before you start as well, I think for the listeners out there, you might also want to clarify maybe what's the difference between being a vegetarian, a vegan, and what do you personally subscribe to. So I know that some people oftentimes they like conflate between vegetarian and veganism and they think they're the same thing. But yeah, maybe you can clarify that when you explain how you got into being a plant-based person.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So, pretty much to start off with, if we go down like the nutritional, I guess, definitions of things, vegetarian, would be just, someone who seeks to remove meat from their diet. So from what I understand, again, I never went the in between stage of being vegetarian. But from what I understand, they still, well, lacto ovo vegetarian is pretty much someone who will still have milk and milk from a cow and also eggs. But then pretty much everything else they're going to seek to remove the meat and all of that kind of stuff. Myself, so for me, like, in being vegan, I didn't really see it as solely a dietary choice. If we go down, it's a long story for me, but pretty much in 2017, it was like growing up, I've always had kind of these issues with my mental health, mental illness, all that kind of stuff. And I think that growing up is not just, well, in today's society, but I think that a lot was kind of the pressures of being in an Asian family. These things were kind of things that we don't really talk about. And so I always knew there was something not quite right as far as the mental health side of things goes for me. But it wasn't until 2017 that I kind of experienced something so bad that I was like, cool, like I should probably start to seek some help for this. Ended up going to therapy, also started through the pharmacotherapy side of things. So a psychiatrist, started on medication, all that kind of stuff. Pretty much got diagnosed with bipolar type 2 disorder. Um, at the time as well, and again, like a trigger warning for anyone listening, mental health, all that kind of stuff. I was starting to get a little bit suicidal, and that was kind of what really pushed me to seek some help. I was like, cool, like obviously whatever I'm doing and keeping this to myself isn't working. I should kind of look out there and do something else. Um, Around that time as well, I kind of subconscious. Uh, I would say it was mostly subconscious exposure to kind of the growing movement of what veganism was. But I guess right time, right place. having a conversation with a friend of mine at university, I actually had no idea that veganism was actually a ethical movement that seeked to pretty much reduce the harm and the commodity status of animals. And as a byproduct of that, obviously your diet's going to change in order to stop consuming them. But first and foremost, the reason behind it was, hey, like, we're literally creating these souls, these animals, for the sole purpose of slaughtering them to eat them. And for me, it was like, well, you know, like, if I'm at a point where I don't even value my own life, I shouldn't really be trying to like mess with theirs. And that was kind of the overnight change that occurred to me, that was just like, cool, like, it's, you know, like, and again, I'm not perfect. Like, there are still things that I think that create harm and all that kind of stuff in the overall scheme of things. But it's more of a point of, hey, if I can go about the rest of my life limiting or reducing the harm that I'm causing to other living beings that, you know, potentially want to stay on this planet more than I do, then why not? Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. So it's good that you mentioned a little bit about the mental health thing, and also coming from, you know, Asian family, because you spoke about two things. You did two things that most Asian families don't do. One is acknowledge mental health problem, and second,
Yep.
go vegan, right? Like, man,
Yeah.
all three of us, we are like from Malaysia, you know, and the it's quite hard to be a vegan there, just because, you know, food is tasty. I'm sure a lot of people would agree that Malaysia probably has one of the best like street foods in the world. And
Yes, Singapore, Malaysia has the best street food.
yeah, already shots fired already to all our Singaporeans listeners out there.
We lost them.
But yeah, so it is very interesting to know that for you, you kind of like started this thing with like this self-reflection, right? Like self-reflection into your own
Yeah.
life, and then it sort of like shine a light onto the life of other like sentient creatures in living on this planet. So yeah, definitely something really commendable. And I also think that maybe you can share with us a little bit on your like resistance training status when you started veganism, and perhaps how did you have any like doubts, like would I be shortchanging my gains in the gym if I switch from like a animal-based, meat-based diet to a completely plant-based diet? So perhaps you can share something on that.
Yeah, no, actually, before Chris, you go, I actually am. One of the questions I wrote down on my paper here was actually quite interesting because, at least from a food science perspective,
Yeah.
people do say that in many cases, a meat-based or at least a diet that consists some form of animal meat tends to have a higher protein content, more so like leucine. And a lot of research has shown like leucine is this thing where it helps to stimulate muscle growth.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big worries a lot of people of like, oh, if I don't eat enough meat, you know, I'm gonna lose my gain. So yeah, curious to kind of see, you know, as you guys can see, like Chris is not losing his gains. If anything, he's making a lot of gains. So how, yeah, like how, like Kedrick said, how did that affect you from like a training perspective, sort of like switching that over?
Yeah, so I think like once we look into kind of like the fundamentals of things, we understand that, or I guess we can kind of draw a few different kind of ideas from it. But I completely agree. Like, there's like when we talk about protein quality, especially in its how it relates to resistance training, muscle growth, all that kind of thing, triggering muscle protein synthesis. Yeah, without a doubt, vegetarian and vegan protein sources are less optimal than animal-based. And like, I'll like being completely honest with you with the, you know, with the evidence out there, like, I'm not biased anyway, like, that's fact. or as close to fact as we have, like with the current research. And so a few things we can kind of do to get around that. Well, if for example, whey protein has 11% leucine per gram of protein, in order to trigger that muscle protein synthesis, getting in that 2 to 3 gram leucine threshold, you need 25, 30 gram bolus of protein. It's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Now, for a vegetarian or vegan, now we're looking at, for example, pea protein, soy protein, wheat gluten, for example. Now we're looking at leucine being more in the 7 to 8% kind of grams per gram of protein. And so in order to get the equivalent bolus to spike kind of that muscle protein synthesis, now we're looking at kind of needing maybe 36 to 40 grams of plant-based protein. And so, yeah, like that's kind of like the, in my experience and what I do in practice as well, that's kind of my workaround for ensuring that happens. And so having larger intakes of protein throughout the day. So the other thing is, of course, we all know Eric Helms, the study he's done towards protein, all that kind of stuff. And actually, I had a really good chat with him about this kind of stuff as well. And I did ask the question, like, is a simple solution for, meeting these requirements for a vegetarian or for a vegan, simply to err on the higher side of the recommended protein intakes. And, we kind of both agreed that, yeah, like, why not? And so, yeah, like if you were to look at my macronutrient breakdown, like gram for gram compared to kind of someone who had animal products, I would probably, you would say that I'd be on the higher side or even outside the top end of that range sometimes. And yeah, without a doubt, that's kind of just what I need to do.
That's very interesting because I do have a lot of friends who are vegetarian, vegan, and plant-based. And one thing that I always kind of make sure that they are getting enough from, and when we talk about nutrition and health, is always like, look, guys, like in the end of the day, the facts are facts. Like you said, Chris, we definitely do need a lot more protein. But and like I'm someone who struggles to eat, like my stomach space is not huge, and you mentioned about trying to get in about 40 50 grams of protein per serve, not to mention being on a more plant-based diet is generally also seen in many cases, but that's why it's so popular for weight loss in general, is that there's a lot of bulk in the food. I don't know if Kedrick has ever experienced a few days or weeks going on plant-based diets, but it's hard to get it in. You just feel so full.
Yeah.
So how were you? Did you feel like you were eating the same amount of food before transitioning over to a plant-based diet, or like, do you really feel like, okay, like I actually have to really try to get it down because I'm gonna lose my gains if I don't?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the lucky thing for me is that I've tracked my food for a really long time. I think I started using MyFitnessPal back in like 2012. Just when like Matt Ogus, Chris Lovato, like the Gymshark crew. And that was actually where I first heard of Eric Helms as well. It was because he was on a lot of Matt Ogus's YouTube videos and all that. But luckily I kind of got into the flexible dieting side of things quite early on. And so when I transitioned over to that plant-based diet, it was like, cool, like I know the numbers that I'm aiming for. Let's just find the foods that will kind of fit there. And of course, like I had, again, because I did this for ethical reasons, it was kind of not really premeditated. It was very like, cool, like one day I was this, one day I'm not. And so it was cool, like, cool, I've done no research as to what foods I can eat. So what did I go for? I went for beans, lentils, all these things that like people like, it's what you see out there and what you hear about. It's like, oh, you just must eat a lot of beans and lentils. It's like, okay, cool, like let's give this a go. And man, like my protein's a lot higher now than it was back then, but even trying to hit, you know, like 150 grams of protein from beans and lentils, your fiber's up at like 90 grams. And you're just like, nah, like I would hit like 1,300 calories and be like, man, like I don't think I can get much else in. But I would. And so you know, like thankfully protein shakes exist because you can just kind of you know, drink them down. And yeah, like definitely at that transitioning kind of stage, it was difficult. I think solely just because I didn't really know what options there were. But like 2017, not that long ago, in between then and now, the kind of options that are like just readily available at supermarkets and stuff like that is like, it's really grown to the point where like even products that were always vegan are now being marketed as vegan. You know, like even though like breads and stuff like that, they've always been, you know, like a lot of them have always been vegan and stuff like that, but now you walk through the aisle and it says vegan friendly on them as if they never were previously. And so I guess, you know, like as long as there's that demand that's growing, companies and stuff are going to change their marketing and branding in order to just appeal and make it easier, more accessible for people to buy the product. But yeah, like again, with carb sources, like I will have a lot of like just white rice rather than, you know, like worrying about all these like other kind of things just add up a lot of bulk and just don't really digest that well. And there are some great just protein alternatives out there as well that are getting like leaner and leaner. I think the issue I had at the start was that vegan protein sources traditionally just weren't that lean. And when I say lean, what I mean is that like, for example, if we take like a pretty general chicken breast, you know, in that 100 gram serving, you know, you're getting a lot of protein, 0 carbs, and like 1 gram of fat. And so with tofu, for example, well, now it's you're getting protein, it's a source of protein, but it's coming alongside a lot of fat and some carbs as well. When we look at tempeh, similar soy products, so it's coming along with protein, carbs, and fats as well. TVP, all these other things, but now we're getting kind of these blends of these kind of like mock meats, all of that are, you know, your pea protein, your wheat gluten, all this kind of stuff. And as a result, the macronutrient profile is actually pretty good. So that's price is another thing with those ones that can be a bit of a barrier. But overall, that's kind of what I would go for just to make it a bit easier now.
Yep. Very interesting. So Chung mentioned just now, and he asked the question if, he's not sure if I actually tried being like vegan for a couple of days or weeks. I've actually tried it before. And to be honest, it wasn't that tough for me, because once you start sourcing out ingredients that actually have quite high in protein, you are able to do it, you know? So I mean, we had this off the record, Chris, but we just talk about like the purpose of this, you know. I probably might not change my stance on my dietary intake regarding like veganism versus eating meat-based or animal-based, but the whole purpose of the conversation that we're having here is to, you know, challenge people. For example, like perhaps someone is on the edge of actually trying to adopt a plant-based diet, but they're like, oh my gosh, like, will I lose my gain? So if they listen to this podcast and they look at your biceps, they'll be like, no, right, I can actually try it. And I can be a testament to that, because like there's this noodles. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's like edamame pasta. Or
Yeah, I love that stuff.
man, like they are mad amount of protein. So it comes in a packet of 200 grams, and 400 grams, and basically one serving is 50 grams. No, sorry, one serving is 100 grams, and it has like 40 grams of protein. So I didn't know once, and I made like half the packet, and I had just from that itself, I had 80 grams of protein. Like I look at my like macro calculator, I was like, what? It's like my math is wrong. Did I key in wrongly? And then I look at the label, I'm like, this is really true. And then, but if you look at it, right, essentially it's this really concentrated like bean sauce that has high amounts of protein, and instead of using your typical like wheat or like flour or like rice, they use that, which is why the protein in content is so high. So, and things like veggie mince, the veggie delight means that mince you can get those like they're made from nuts, so nut mince, they are pretty high in protein as well, you know.
Yeah.
And they don't taste all that bad, especially if you put like sauce, if you make a pasta. And to be honest, sometimes I feel like that honestly tastes a bit cleaner than buying the cheapest mince from like your grocery, because they're just so like high in fat. You can literally see a layer of fat floating there, and it's not
Yeah.
like appealing, especially when it's cold. So for all the listeners like out there, you know, I honestly don't think it is as difficult as you think to actually adopt like a plant-based diet. And the caveat here is that I say this only doing it for a couple of days. I've not done it for like weeks, right? I would say that my dietary pattern is highly influenced by the flavors I get. And I would admit that certain animal like animal substitute, they don't taste as well as the meat-based stuff, right? And that is also probably because I'm not used to the taste, you know. So I really like your approach and what you shared. But something that I've always had in mind would be going back to the question of eating a diverse source of protein. So we know like soy protein, we have a spectrum of amino acids, right? And soy protein might be high in certain amino acids and low in some, right? Which is why you mentioned like combination protein, like pea, rice, soy combined. They give you like a full spectrum of all the amino acids, which is then comparable to like animal-based protein. So let's just say if you're not getting your protein source from a protein powder, which I assume you would get your protein powder that you consume is also a blend. When you eat your regular meals that are not from that doesn't contain protein powder, how do you mix them up to ensure that you are at least getting the full spectrum of amino acids?
Yeah, so and honestly, like I'm not going to claim to be an expert at this at all. There's like, for example, with the pastas that you were talking about, you know, there are the black bean pastas, edamame spaghetti, all that kind of stuff. And so the edamame is from a soy product. So you probably assume that the amino acid profile you're getting from that is very akin to a soy product. If you use that as kind of like your base for your meal, have some, I don't know, just any kind of vegetables in there as well. And then maybe look at, for example, there's a product called sun-fed chicken-free chicken, which is made out of solely pea protein. You could use that to kind of mix in there as well. And then you've got, you know, your soy, your pea, and then some trace amino acids from other stuff in your meal. That would be one way to do it. Yeah, exactly like you said before, just to kind of reiterate, the like protein powder, like I would, yeah, personally I would definitely go for a blend. Or if I, you know, just cheaped out sometime and just only got a pea protein, I try to mix it with soy milk or something like that. Yeah, what else? There are like some kind of the like veggie minces and stuff like that. They are blends themselves now as well, which is cool. And yeah, like to a certain extent, I would recommend that if people are trying a plant-based diet to actually go for some of these more like processed alternative meats, because they just have a really diverse range of ingredients in there. And they taste a little better. Well, they taste pretty good as well, just because they're trying to imitate the taste of a sausage, or like a meat sausage or chicken nuggets or something like that. And so they're usually very like whole food plant-based dieters will kind of refer to like the mock meats as like foods that are just for people like transitioning over. But like I don't know, they taste good, and we've grown, like personally I grew up eating all those kind of foods, and so I'm always going to be someone who wants to go out for a vegan burger sometime, or gets the vegan chicken nuggets when I want to eat something like that. It just adds a little bit more interest to your meals as well, rather than just kind of keeping it with a rice, vegetables, and plain something else in there.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And actually kind of as you sort of talk about the mock meats and stuff like that, it actually kind of brings back a quote, ironically, from my mum. I don't know why, and she would always say this, where if you're going to go on a plant-based diet, just go on a plant-based diet and don't eat mock meats, because like if you're and she is, I guess, to an extent a little bit more on the religious side, and she has this belief, I don't know if, hey mom, if you're listening to this, I don't know if this is still true or not, but she would say, hey, if you're going on a plant-based diet, or or just not eating meat, then the belief shouldn't be like, I'm just going to find an alternative to meat that looks like meat, right? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I'm gonna eat chicken, I'm gonna eat chicken. Like I'm not gonna eat fake chicken, and that's sort of like something that actually came into mind. And I guess the question there is really, do you feel like that is something, coming back to your, I guess the main reason and why you kind of switched over, is that something that sometimes still kind of lingers in the back of your mind? If you don't mind sharing, don't don't
No,
worry. Don't.
no, not at all, not at all. So like kind of going back to the reasons that I went vegan in the first place was because personally, like I just saw it as like for my own morals, no one else's, just mine. I didn't see it as my right to do anything that's going to affect the life of these things. And so like so my like I would kind of rank the morals as being like cool, like me eating a chicken is like like eating a dog, killing
Bad.
a person, all that kind of stuff, and so what I always think about is cool, like I've played Call of Duty in the past, like I've played video games, all that kind of stuff, and I'll shoot people, and I'll kill people in the game, and it's like cool, like when you kill someone in the game, you're like, oh, like you get a high out of it, and then it's like when you go outside, you're not going to shoot people, like because now like because now morally there's something going on there that you're like, cool, like this is actually killing some stuff. And so for me, that's the mock meats, like I'll eat them because I get pleasure from it. I enjoy the taste, all this kind of stuff, but there's no killing involved. Like I can go out and buy that, and it doesn't contribute to the demand of animal products.
Yep, fair enough. I think that what the insight that you provided into your personal morals is like really important. I mean, just to kind of like tie in a little bit on what Chung said. So feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but your drive to embrace veganism isn't really what doesn't sound like it stems from like religious beliefs, because in Malaysia, people that are vegans are usually like, for example, like Buddhists, they don't eat meat because, like, they, like really staunch Buddhists, they don't even like kill like a mosquito, you know, like there's always that saying, or like, for example, Hindus who don't eat beef because like the cow is a sacred animal. But from the sound of it, yours is just a personal, like a moral system that you adopt for yourself and not necessarily tied to any religious like belief, pre-existing religious beliefs.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I think that is also like something for people to like kind of understand, I guess, is when, you know, like how Chris mentioned just now, when he started like that, he started this and he just went into it. And some days, you know, you mentioned that at the start, you might, one day you might eat a plant-based, and you know, I think as you slowly transition transition into like more like I wouldn't say serious, but as you learn more, right, there is the opportunity for people to transition, right? It's not like, hey, if I choose to adopt only, I want to be a plant-based eater, I need to be 100% or nothing, right? It's more like you said, it's not like a religious belief where you adopt, because most likely if it's a religious belief, I don't think that the religious belief has like, okay, cool, one day I eat beef, the next day I don't eat beef, you know. But for you, because you kind of adopt that moral system for yourself, you can kind of like slowly, gradually transition based on what you're comfortable, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that like what people I guess mix up a lot is like the actual I'm pretty sure it's on like the vegan, like whatever the World Vegan Society is, but like their definition of veganism is it's along the lines of someone who seeks to essentially eliminate the consumption and exploitation of animals to whatever extent is possible and practical.
Yep.
And so again, what's possible and practical for different people is very different. But I think again, like as soon as you kind of have that moral idea of being like, hey, like I want to reduce this for the sake of you know um for the sake of the animals or anything like that, for sentient beings, then that's kind of like the starting point. You're always going to either make mistakes or just be in situations where perhaps it's not ideal. I know that kind of along the ideas of religious beliefs as well, is that a lot of religions, minority religions, as part of their traditions and all that, will consume animal products. And for someone who's grown up their whole life, like living that way and choosing to be vegan themselves, and then going to these, very sacred events and being like, oh, you know what? No, I'm not going to take part in this, but because I'm vegan. It's hard to weigh up, and I think that unless you've been a part of a minority group like that, you never really will understand. Like myself, I don't think I'll ever understand the kind of like turmoil that will be going on in that person's head, to be like, oh, like, do I uphold the traditions of my religion, which is kind of on the verge of not really existing, or do I just stand up for veganism? And I would say that depending on what kind of upbringing you've been in yourself, you would be either side of that. There'd be people who would definitely be like, nah, go with the veganism. There'd be people who would be like, oh, like, I'm not quite sure. Like, that's a real hard choice. And yeah, so I think at the end of the day, it's like that individual's choice to make. And yeah, who knows? Like, it's just kind of the way their journey will go.
Yeah, that's very well put.
Yep. I think that now that we are kind of like talking a little bit about like kind of like the struggles, I would like to touch upon a little bit on like barriers, right? Or perceived barriers, because at the end of the day, what I said, I want this podcast, I want this episode to paint a very clear and fair picture. I'm not trying to create a straw man of veganism and say, oh, this is why you shouldn't adopt it. And for you who have personally lived through this experience, you can definitely share with us. The first thing I would like to kind of like talk about, and bring back to the conversation you mentioned just now, was price point. So in 2017, right, you were already in New Zealand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So New Zealand is a slightly more developed country, right? And
Yeah.
I only came to New Zealand in 2019. So all my life I was in Malaysia until 2019, excluding the time I studied a year in London. But would you say that if you were in a slightly less developed country where maybe vegan options are not as accessible, and because of the rule of like supply and demand, because it's not accessible, it's also more expensive, would you think that it would be harder for you to make that change or the decision to actually embrace a plant-based diet if you were, let's just say, Chris is in some other like not so developed or developing country, for example?
Honestly, I do. Yeah. I think there's always going to be kind of two sides to things. There's whenever we make a decision, we always want to think about, cool, like there's some sort of perceived benefit of that decision. Something we're going to gain from going through with it. And there will always be some sort of expected cost to doing that as well. And I think that, without a doubt, human beings in order to make rational decisions, if the expected costs exceed the perceived benefits of anything we want to go through, we're not going to do it.
Yep.
And so,
True.
depending on you, like, I can't really say, just because for reference as well, I was actually born in New Zealand, so I've been here my whole life. So I'm actually like kind of like fake Malaysian, because Malaysian's a nationality. It's just everyone like says, oh, your parents are from Malaysia, so you're Malaysian. But no, I'm actually my parents
Born
are
and
Malaysian
raised.
Chinese, and really I'm New Zealand Chinese then.
Yeah.
But yeah, Malaysia all the same.
Yeah.
All the same.
But yeah, so for me, I can't really say with much certainty whether or not I would even have made the change at all. Like, again, if the costs to reach that benefit were just too high, like exceeded the benefit, then being a rational human being, I probably would have said it's too hard. And I think that's what we face a lot these days as well, is that a lot of conversations, a lot of people who talk to me about this stuff, they will kind of agree that the factory farming side of things, and where we've really pushed that industry to, it's quite cruel. And so a lot of people kind of already believe that the treatment of animals as it stands at the moment isn't ideal. But no one will be, well, not no one, but like in a way, like that acceptance already is kind of what would be the first stepping stone to being vegan. But again, if the costs are too high, i.e. whatever upbringing you've had, like, you really need to change a lot of your life. And now that I'm already there, kind of thing, like and a lot of people kind of already there, like they might want to paint the picture that it's some really easy journey to go through, and you're like, oh no, it's simple, all you need to do is cut out this, you're fine. And for a lot of people, it's just not that easy.
Yeah, for sure. Like,
Yeah.
it's always this, I guess, like this debate that we have in our heads, right? Especially when, like, we can sit here and sort of like talk about this all day, and we can even go so far as to sort of ask someone who's like 50 years old and they're a business owner and say, hey, like, try being vegetarian or vegan,
Yeah.
it might cost you more. And for them, it's like, cool, like, where do I sign up? Like, where do I pay? What's the best organic sources out there? And I think it's always this debate. And um, uh, social economics is a big thing. We
Yeah.
see that, and like, this can be another discussion for another time, but we can always see, like, people, at least in New Zealand, for example, people in South Auckland are always more susceptible to a certain form of a nutrition choice. People out in North Shore, where me and Kedrick are based, I believe, are more susceptible to nutrition choices. And I think what you said, Chris, there, like, I think you hit the nail there. A lot of these decisions, at least when people try to make these same decisions for themselves, always comes down to, like, hey, is it viable? Like, is my philosophical or moral choice the logical choice?
Mm.
And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people always teeter on that edge.
Yeah.
And we see that, from someone transitioning over to being plant-based. We see that from someone, so, like, living their whole life obese, and all of a sudden we say, like, you need to pay like $10,000 to get liposuction and go on this fitness plan, and
Yeah.
I don't have the money. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, but it's just the way it is. I think what you put there is definitely very, very true.
Yep.
Yeah.
And now that, like, we've kind of talked a little bit of like the financial side, I another question more on like the social barriers. So, like, from my understanding, all right, you're currently engaged, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, maybe you can talk a little bit about. I mean, you don't have to divulge any information that you don't want to, but like, when you enter into the relationship, was your partner already a vegan? If your partner wasn't, right, did you change her or did she change you? Or, and maybe, for example, maybe you've encountered this question before, like, oh, if I want to embrace veganism but my partner doesn't, how do I go about it? So you can talk a little bit about, and it doesn't have to be just be romantic relationship, but just social groups, because
Yeah.
in New Zealand, for example, it is most restaurants here, they do have vegan options. But let's say for someone who is listening, for example, in Malaysia, they might not have vegan options. And if you go out in a social setting, right, you might not be able to eat. So, for example, you can talk a little bit about like the relationship part, because obviously your fiance is your closest, like,
Life partner, basically.
essentially. And then maybe you can move a little bit into like the social aspect as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So my partner is vegetarian. So again, kind of for the listeners at home, the difference being, like, she still has her dairy products, and her eggs as well. And she's been so her family are Taoist, so religiously they're they're vegetarian. And she's kind of gone through I think periods of like when she was growing up, kind of thing, where she would have meet with friends at school and stuff like that. But for the most recent kind of chapter of her life, she's just been vegetarian herself. And so for me, when it comes to like a partner, and again, like I think that both of you would be able to relate to this, and perhaps depending on where the conversation goes, this might even be kind of like something we can revisit as to like why I actually got into bodybuilding as well. But growing up in New Zealand, like, or anywhere as well, like we experience racism, we experience bullying, all that kind of stuff. And so important qualities I look for in a partner, like, like a few things would be included, like number one, like, are they racist? If my partner's racist, that's like more of a deal breaker than if they eat meat, to be honest. Like, are they sexist? Do they hate a minority group? All this kind of stuff. Like, if like, to me, I'm a human being first, and I'm always going to have my biases. And like, although I choose to reduce and as close to eliminate my treatment of animals as much as possible, if someone had a baby and a pig and told me like to kill one of them, I'd have to like honestly, like I'd probably choose the pig. Again, when would that situation happen? But like for like the sake of like just biases in general, whether it's human nature or social conditioning, I'm probably going to choose the baby, like as in to live, not to kill the baby.
Good
I'm
to know.
probably
Good to know.
gonna-
Good to clarify.
yeah. And so similarly here, like again, if you know, a friend or a romantic partner are hateful towards humans, or you know, like a human group, I'm probably going to bias that higher than if, you know, like by the same kind of thing, they're hateful towards animals. Although in a perfect world, I would like for them to be you know, for us to see eye to eye on a lot of things, and that being one of them. But I think if you're always looking for um these kind of like ideal things, you're never going to appreciate the actual qualities someone has. If you're always looking for that kind of perfect thing that may not even exist.
Mm.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
basically someone out there needs to create a vegansingles.com as a dating app, right?
I'm pretty sure that
Yeah.
exists.
And then
Um,
the
yeah.
the tagline can be planting the seed of love, something like that, you know.
Nice.
Maybe it should
vegansingles.com.
be you.
Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, so before we bring this episode to a close, I'm gonna just field some really like quick fire questions. So when I mean quick fire, so you will answer it as short as one word, but maximum one sentence, right?
Okay.
So the first quick fire question for you would be, when it comes to protein, is total protein intake, if you have to choose between total protein intake versus the ideal composition of amino acids, which one would you go for?
Total protein intake.
Okay. Second quick fire question would be, let's just say if you were not a vegan, where would you fall into what spectrum will you fall into in terms of reducing like animal products? And for example, you just say you actually like meat. So
If I were, I'm not sure. Sorry. Yeah.
No.
No,
Valid answer. Valid answer.
yeah.
yeah,
I
and
can say, yeah.
I think this is the last one. You can go a little bit more. I wouldn't say in depth, but just more options. Okay. Favorite vegan supplements and why?
Okay. So like number one would be a protein blend. Again, like especially with like as resistant people who take part in resistance training, we need more protein.
It's
And
never enough.
yeah, exactly. And so a high quality protein powder will always be kind of my number one. To the point where I'd even just refer to it as food. On top of that, like personally, I would do a B12. No specific order as far as importance, but like B12, creatine. For sports, for training performance in general, I'd usually go for like your electrolytes as well, so calcium, magnesium. I add iodized table salt to quite a lot of my meals for the iodine, as well as salt. And then iron, vitamin C. Whether you need to supplement them is one thing or another, but again, just looking for foods that are higher or fortified in either one of those. Caffeine. I think that would probably be it. Oh, D3, vitamin D3, probably a vegan omega as well. Not the flaxseed stuff, but like actual like algae omega-3.
Yeah.
Like DHA EPA, not ALA. Yeah, I think that would be it.
Right. And we have one last question that we usually ask all our guests, but before I go to that question,
Yeah.
this is the last quick fire question. The
Cool.
documentary game changers.
Yeah.
Good information or not for someone to embrace a plant-based diet. And remember, it's quick fire, so you can't give like an essay.
Yeah,
so
right. I'm gonna say not.
Okay, right.
Okay, there we go. We heard it, guys.
Yes, that is basically the whole purpose of the podcast. But
That's it.
But yeah,
Yeah, I was actually wondering whether when we would discuss that.
Yeah,
I've got.
I agree with you with the same sentiments, but we can probably do like second episode on like veganism as well.
Point, yeah.
And the last question we usually ask all our guests, right? The name of our podcast is Back to Square One, which is just a play of Back to Square One. So let's just say if we go back to square one for someone who is thinking about embracing a vegan or plant-based diet, where should they start, and what resource could you recommend them to look for?
Ooh. What resource? Oh man, I don't know, because I didn't even use any resources. I would honestly, like, he's not even vegan, but Eric Helms did a great podcast with Jackson.
Yep.
And that, like, pretty much Eric Helms's research is great on protein and everything like that. Again, this is probably more for someone who wants to go plant-based and does a lot of resistance training. And so like that podcast pretty much takes all of Eric's research and applies it more in the sense of like how cautious do people who want to be plant-based need to be with this information? Is everything, still the same, or are there things that they need to change? And honestly, I think that if like you're scared of losing your gains, then that would be the one thing you could watch and be like, cool, like I have a good direction of where to go. Now, without the resource there, I would say if you're thinking about going plant-based, start with yourself. Make sure you're doing it because it's something you want to do, not because some documentary that's literally made for the sole purpose of getting you to do something is that.
Yeah,
make sure it's something you want to do, because that's where lifelong change happens. If you're doing something because of some external motivator, chances are you're not going to stick with it. Unless you find your own why along the way. But if you start with your why, I can guarantee that any choice you make will resonate deep within you, and you're going to feel a lot better about what you're doing.
Yep. And as someone who's like kind of like a person who's like pseudo philosopher who just like philosophy, I would recommend people check out Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. So that's a pretty good book if you're kind of like on the edge or just want to know reasons why, or ethical reasons why people should actually care for animals. So yeah, I guess we can wrap up our episode here. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us. I think it has been really insightful. I know that we didn't go into the nitty-gritty of like, how much minerals you should take, how much amino acids you should take, but I believe that with this episode, the whole purpose is to kind of speak to people out there who are on the edge of maybe trying to adopt a plant-based diet or have actually thought about it. At the end of the day, I hope that your experience and your sharing can provide our listeners with some insight into what it really is like to be a bodybuilder, and also to be a successful one, right? And be jacked and still kind of like fly against the regular convention that you need to eat animal-based product to be successful in that area. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And I guess before we end the recording, any shout outs, as every podcast does?
Oh, any shout outs?
Yeah, just share like where we can find.
Where can we find you?
Yeah, I guess
where we can find you.
Plug. You can find me on Instagram at shredded.tofu. That's honestly all I really do. I'm just an Instagram person.
Well, there you go, guys.
Yeah, that's about it.
That's cool. All right, Chris. Well, thanks for jumping on the show again, guys. If you do like this podcast, if you like this episode, give us a like, thumbs up, subscribe on whatever platform that you're watching, or if it's on YouTube, go for it. But yeah, till next time, guys. Stay safe.